I always enjoyed the peace and quiet of being home alone. My parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me with the house to myself. The solitude was comforting, giving me a break from the usual hustle and bustle. I decided to make some popcorn and watch a movie in the living room. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard the first noise. It sounded like footsteps coming from upstairs. Paused the movie and listened carefully. House was old, so it wasn't unusual for it to make noises, but these footsteps were different. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was walking around. Each step seemed to echo through the house, amplifying the eerie feeling in the air. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination, and continued watching my movie. A few minutes later, I heard the footsteps again, this time closer. My heart began to race. The TV and called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" There was no response, but the footsteps stopped. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to investigate. I slowly climbed the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible. Each step I took seemed to creak louder than the last. When I reached the top, I checked each room. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The attic door was slightly open. I had never been in the attic. It was dark and dusty, and I always found it creepy. The thought of entering the attic made me uneasy, but my curiosity got the better of me. I gathered my courage and opened the door wider. The air inside was cold, and the smell of mildew was strong. I shone the flashlight around and saw nothing but old furniture and boxes. As I was about to leave, I heard a whisper. It was faint but clear. "Get out." Blood ran cold. Backed out of the attic, closed the door, and ran downstairs. I locked myself in the living room, keeping the flashlight and a kitchen knife by my side. I stayed awake all night, listening for any more noises. The hours dragged on, and every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified in the silence. Shadows danced on the walls, and my mind played tricks on me, making me see things that weren't there. My heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When my parents came home, I told them what had happened. They didn't believe me at first, but when they saw how scared I was, they agreed to check the attic. They found nothing unusual, but I knew what I had heard. Whisper was too real, too clear to be a figment of my imagination. I never stayed home alone again after that night. The memory of those footsteps and the chilling whisper haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the house with me that night, something that didn't belong. Despite my best efforts to move on, the incident stayed with me. I began researching the history of our house, hoping to find some explanation for what I had experienced. I discovered that the house had once belonged to an old woman who lived alone. She was known to be reclusive and strange, often heard talking to herself. She died in the attic, alone and forgotten. The knowledge only deepened my fear. Couldn't help but wonder if her restless spirit still lingered in the house, resentful of our presence. I started noticing small things. Objects moved from their usual places, cold spots in certain areas of the house, and the feeling of being watched. One night, months after the initial incident, I was in my room doing homework. My parents were downstairs and the house was quiet. Suddenly, I heard a faint knocking sound, like someone tapping on the walls. The noise grew louder and more insistent, and my heart began to race. I grabbed the flashlight I kept by my bed and slowly made my way to the attic. The door was ajar, just like before. My hands trembled as I pushed it open and shone the light inside. The room was, as I remembered, dusty and filled with old furniture and boxes. But this time, something was different. In the corner, near an old rocking chair, I saw a shadowy figure. It was the outline of an old woman, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She was rocking back and forth, muttering to herself. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was one of anger and sorrow. Was frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure slowly turned to face me, her eyes locking onto mine. The air grew colder, and the smell of mildew became overpowering. She raised a bony finger and pointed at me, her voice now clear and chilling. "Get out!" I stumbled, backward, my flashlight flickering. I managed to turn and run, slamming the attic door behind me. I didn't stop until I was downstairs, breathless and terrified. I told my parents what I had seen, and this time they believed me. The fear in my eyes was undeniable. We decided to move shortly after that night. The house held too many dark memories, and the sense of unease was too strong to ignore. As we packed up our belongings, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. The house had been our home for years, but it was no longer a place of comfort. As we drove away for the last time, I glanced back at the house. The attic window seemed to glow faintly, and I thought I saw the old woman's figure standing there, watching us leave. I turned away, hoping to put the past behind me, but the memory of that night, the footsteps, the whisper, and the shadowy figure in the attic will stay with me forever. Some things are better left undiscovered, and some doors should never be opened.
Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks.
It was a stormy night and I was home alone. The rain was pouring down and thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind howled around the corners of the house, creating eerie whistling sounds. I decided to do some laundry in the basement to pass the time and keep myself occupied. I hated going down there. It was dark, damp, and filled with creepy old furniture left by previous owners. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs, the air grew colder and more oppressive. A single light bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long, flickering shadows on the walls, making the basement even more unsettling. Tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me and focused on sorting the laundry. Just as I was separating the whites from the colors, the power went out. The basement was plunged into darkness, and I cursed under my breath. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the familiar yet unsettling surroundings. I made my way to the breaker box, hoping to restore the power quickly. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like something being dragged across the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I turned around, shining my phone's light in all directions, but saw nothing. The basement was silent, except for the sound of the storm raging outside. I told myself it was just the old house making noises, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. With trembling hands, I managed to flip the breaker, and the lights flickered back on. The basement was illuminated once more, but the sense of dread lingered. I hurried to finish the laundry, my ears straining for any unusual sounds. As I was closing the basement door, I heard the dragging noise again, followed by a low moan. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. Slowly, I closed the door and locked it. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I ran up the stairs and into my room. I locked that door too and sat on my bed, trying to calm down. I could still hear the moaning, faint but persistent. It sounded like it was coming from right beneath me, echoing through the floorboards. I sat in my room, wide-eyed and alert, listening to the storm and the unsettling noises from the basement. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. I tried to distract myself with my phone, but my mind kept drifting back to the sounds I had heard. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made me jump. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of the front door opening. My parents were home. Ran downstairs to meet them, my fear evident on my face, told them about the noises, but they laughed it off, saying it was just the storm and the old house. "You're letting your imagination get the best of you," my dad said with a reassuring smile. But I knew what I had heard. Sounds were too real, too distinct to be just my imagination. Despite my parents' reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was down there. That night, I had trouble falling asleep, the memory of the dragging noise and the low moan replaying in my mind. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the basement. I wanted to believe my parents, to think that it was just the storm and the house settling, but the fear was still there, lurking in the back of my mind. I avoided the basement as much as possible, only going down when absolutely necessary and never alone. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to do some research about the house, hoping to find some explanation for what I had experienced. I thus spent hours online searching for any information about the history of our home. Found old newspaper articles and records that revealed a chilling story. Many years ago, a man had lived in the house with his wife. He was a recluse, rarely seen by the neighbors. One stormy night, similar to the one I had experienced, his wife had gone missing. The police searched the house and surrounding area, but found no trace of her. The man claimed she had left him, but rumors spread that he had something to do with her disappearance. As I read the articles, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Description of the night she disappeared matched the sounds I had heard in the basement. The dragging noise, the low moan, it all made sense. It was as if her restless spirit was trying to communicate, to tell her story. I never went into the basement alone again. Fear of encountering whatever was down there was too great. I told my parents about what I had discovered, but they remained skeptical. They didn't want to believe that our home had such a dark past. To this day, the memory of that stormy night haunts me. The sounds I heard, the feeling of being watched, and the unsettling history of our house all remain etched in my mind. I learned to respect the unknown and to trust my instincts. Some things are better left unexplored, and some places are best avoided, especially when you're home alone.